guys. I commute
Oh,
all the
I
time.
don't know, usually not.
It's
Usually I
bad
can get here,
all the
in-
way.
I
It
always
starts
give
at
myself an
Bailey.
hour, and I usually get here in 40 minutes, but today it was an hour and 10.
Well, you know that Morgan Hill, they had those games. What did you guys have? The
And
Stand there and memorize all these tests and all this other stuff.
All right, let's do it.
So we're gonna
And
start and get
somebody
Walt
came to
up,
visit
right?
me, and they were like
Call to order,
appalled, but it
roll
was
call.
Yeah.
like, it was like, I'm gonna do this
This thing
once,
on?
and
Yep.
I'm gonna focus all my energy on this.
Okay.
You ready?
Good afternoon. We're starting a bit late. This is the May 17th meeting of the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency. We do not yet have a quorum, but we're going to receive some reports that don't require a quorum to take any action. So to get started, we're going to ask Walt Glines to come up and make a report on the Public Advisory Commission.
Do you like a roll call first?
You want to do, Rob,
Pardon me?
roll call?
Roll call?
Do you want to do roll call before we have everyone here?
Yeah.
Okay, very well. Let's do that then. Thanks.
Vice Chair Courtney,
Here.
Board Members Panical. Panical.
Yes, present.
Harney. Ho.
Oh, present.
Wasserman.
Here.
Tucker.
Here.
Arenas. Carmen.
Here.
Okay. The board met the first week of the month, and we reviewed many of the things that are before you tonight, including the operating budget, the automatic fee adjustment, and the habitat plan report. We also briefly talked about the status of the wildlife crossing, or lack thereof, with the high-speed rail is coming across Chaco Pass. And the high-speed rail is already being built. Giant pylons taller than this building are there now. And it's, ongoing work, and it's amazing. Ed handed us out these last night, and so the Habitat Agency is, we have cash, we're ready to buy your habitat eligible land, and he's going to be making some presentations in the community to chambers of commerce and this kind of stuff, just to let, it's public outreach about the agency itself, and we're serious about wanting to add to the inventory of land. And that's it. If there's any questions, I'll attempt to answer them.
Any questions?
Wait, where was that you're seeing tall pylons?
Out on Chaco Pass.
No way, really? Okay. I haven't seen them. Okay,
We
thank
had
you.
a board member last month who told us and described the size of them.
Okay.
Wow. That's impressive.
Well, I don't know if it is.
It's interesting that they haven't completed the alignment yet, though,
Right.
through here, so.
Could be for a new 7-Eleven.
Well, and that's also talks about they're going to make the choice anyway, no matter what. And now it may be on the same rail that is going there now. So, I mean, it's interesting how to keep it from going to, triple, quadruple the budget. But that's my editorial opinion.
Thank you very much. Next, are we thinking we'd like to hear number 6?
Public comment?
Public comment? Any public comment? I'm not seeing any. Okay.
So, number 6 is an update on the Friends formation. We probably were able to form this nonprofit entity in record time, under a year, from start to obtaining both nonprofit status under the state and the federal government. So we now are moving forward. We are expanding the board from the minimum 3 board members to 5 board members, and I'm in the process of scheduling a meeting of the board for the early part of June. I don't know if you have any specific questions. I think the report was pretty self-explanatory, but basically the Friends of the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency is open for business.
That's terrific news. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Armento?
No, I don't, actually, I really would like a refresher on how, this is a separate entity from us, right?
Yes, so when the governing board determined that it would be best to invest the endowment with or through the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation said we needed to establish a friends group as the conduit of the funds, that they couldn't deal directly with the Habitat Agency. So the main purpose of the Friends Group is to enable the money transfers related to the endowment and to be able to invest through the Silicon Valley Community Foundation where we can get a higher rate of return than the conservative government investments that we would otherwise be limited to. So first we had to incorporate, and we did that, and then we had to apply for nonprofit status, and we did that. And once we got that at the federal level, then we were able to get it at the state level.
Okay, so, but our money is in that pot of money?
Actually, our money has not been moved yet because we have not had the meeting of the expanded board of directors, which we hope to have in a few weeks, and we have not entered, or the Friends has not entered into an agreement with the foundation yet. But Ed and I will be meeting with the foundation investment people at the end of this month, and then take that information to the Friends board meeting next month.
Okay, there's just nowhere in the future ever that they're going to, that group of people, whoever they are, is going to have control over our money from this agency?
No,
As far as how we spend it, or, you know, blah,
no,
blah, blah, blah.
not at all. It's really,
Just being clear.
no, and also, it's only a percentage of our money. It's only the endowment money.
Oh, okay.
It's not all of the other money. So there's this big chunk of money over here that has nothing to do with the Friends, and then there's the endowment money over here, which is really geared towards what happens 50 years from now, so that we can keep things going in perpetuity. And that's the chunk that we'll be dealing with, and we'll be reporting to you, periodically. But the nice thing about having a Friends group is people can donate things to the Friends group, and people tend to be more inclined to donate to a Friends group than to donate to a governmental entity.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And there's also nonprofits, there's certain grants that only nonprofits can apply for, as well as, we have to do some more investigation in this, but all the land that we hold, whether it's owned by us or county parks or OSA or some other entity, has to have a conservation easement placed over it. So in the case of properties that we own, we're exploring whether this entity could hold the easement if we can't get a third party to hold the easement for us. And there may be some instances where that allows for that flexibility.
Okay. That's it.
Any other questions?
I still have a question. So nonprofit can they hold conservation easements? I heard you say. Is that typical?
So that's something in the process of researching.
Okay,
Yes.
very well. Thank you.
But like groups like conservation nonprofits can hold conservation easements, like the Nature Conservancy, the Natural Heritage Foundation,
I see.
Trust for Public Lands, different cattlemen's, trust, I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's a state, California Cattlemen's Trust or something like that. They can hold easements also, yeah.
Very well. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. With the arrival of Ms. Arenas, I believe we have a quorum. Is that correct?
Correct.
Very well. Should we proceed to the consent calendar?
Motion to approve, 1 through 3.
Second, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 4, or 5. You want to go to 5? FY19 draft annual operating budget.
Yes, I can
Sold.
handle that. Or we've skipped ahead. Item 4 would be, oh, 4's been moved? Okay. Gotcha. I don't know what,
That happened to me today too, Edmund. I put a razor on my trunk when I went out to the garbage.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
gonna come back and get the razor and go to Walgreens. I forgot to pick up the razor. I backed out of my driveway, then rolled forward and ran over my razor.
Oh,
It happens to all of us.
thank you.
Oh, my God.
That's I feel better, thank
Yeah,
you.
good, good.
So I'm just going, so as part of our adoption of our budget, we come before the implementation board to present the final draft budget that would be adopted by the governing board. And I'll keep this brief, but I can obviously entertain any questions that you may have concerning the budget. So this was presented at the budget workshop in March, and it was also presented at the PAC meeting on May 3rd. So this is, the 3 columns represent kind of points in time. So the first column on the left represents where we were last year around this time, and this is what we estimated revenues to be, what we estimated grants would be, and what the total estimated revenues would be. And then the middle is estimated actual, kind of like where we are at this point in time today versus a year ago. And then the column on the far right is our projected budget for next year. So as you can see, revenues have kind of turned upside down. We had, and this is due in part, so we projected we get $5.5 million in revenues from mitigation fees. We actually are currently at almost 9.6. Given some of the activity, there's a participating special entity application from PG&E that's going to be executed soon. There's some other stuff coming in from the municipalities. So I can't say exactly what it'll be, but I think it'll be ultimately when we come back to you in September with the final budget for this fiscal year. I'm expecting revenues from fees to be over 10 million. But this is where we are today. Grants, you can see, probably saying, Ed, what happened with grants? The 107,000 represents the local assistance grants, which are scientific research grants. And we got a couple of those, and in total was 107,000, or yes, 107,000. So for a total estimated revenues of nearly 9.7. So the reason why the grants are so off is what I explained it, and I'll get into more detail during my EO report to update you on the trips to Washington and discussions I've had since that trip in April. But essentially our Section 6 grant, which was awarded from what I found out, is being held up by the Department of Interior. And I'll get into a lot more detail on that. So what would have been a $2 million grant plus a Wildlife Conservation Board match is absent. So our budget estimate for next year reflects those grants carrying over to next year, plus hopefully a $2 million transfer of funds by the Water District through their D7 program to help with the implementation of the habitat plan. So that's where we come up with $6 million. I'm not projecting a new Section 6 grant, given all the uncertainty associated with what's going on in Washington. If the park bond passes, though it takes a while for that money to, for the state to sell the bonds and that money to be available. But that'll be a funding source that we'll start identifying in projected grant revenues in the future. I think it's premature for me to anticipate that money being available for the next fiscal year. So we're anticipating total estimated revenues, if that $2 million is freed up, and then the WCB match comes in at $11,100,000. And you can see the breakdown of where we think fees are going to come from are in that pie in the lower right. Now for the next slide, this represents appropriations. And again, at the last year at this time, we thought we'd spend about $3.6 million. We're spending significantly less than that. Not because we're budget hawks or anything like that, but because of some of the restoration projects that we thought would be under construction by now have been delayed by permitting, primarily getting our permits from the water board. So we're having the same problems that private and public development has with getting permits. And this is a project that the water board likes, so I can imagine some of the challenges for projects they don't like. So the big one is the San Felipe Creek restoration project in Grant Park. We did have a kickoff meeting. Tara organized it earlier this week, and we talked about permitting and how to move forward. It will happen, but I think the majority of the expenses for it will happen next year, and the same with the Coyote Ridge pond restoration project that's being, where Jerry Haas is the project manager. So then, so that's why we're only, we're spending roughly $1.4 million less than we thought. And those costs are carrying over into next fiscal year. And that's why you're seeing a jump of nearly $1 million from the 17-18 estimated budget to the, and actually the estimated actual, it's nearly 2.4 million in difference. But that's the reason why. It's those projects that we thought were going to happen this year and haven't. One thing that came up with our meeting with the PAC that I thought they were very astute to bring up, so they asked us about our administrative costs. And I said, well, we put all our salaries in there. So we have 4.5 FTEs with the agency. But the lion's share of the work that Jerry and Tara do is in categories 2 and 3, so technical and permitting support and conservation strategy implementation. So going forward, I've asked them to sort of track their hours in response to the PAC saying it would be better to plug their cost into the actual work that they're doing. So going forward, they're going to track their hours to kind of get a percentage of where most of their work is. I think Tara told me that 90% of her work, if not 95% of the work, is in category 1 or 2 and 3. Primarily category 3 is where Tara works. Jerry works a lot in category 2. So going forward, we're going to track things a little bit differently, just to try to put costs in where they, thank you. So the final agency budget will be submitted to the governing board for their approval on June 21st, 2018. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Okay, going back to the projects you were talking about, can you back up a couple slides?
Yep.
So are we going to carry over the 1 million from this year? And does that make it 3? Or?
Correct.
Okay. So it's about the same level of activity.
Exactly.
And you think those projects will move forward? Okay. Very good.
Yes.
That was my question. Any others have any questions?
Motion to recommend adoption.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Were we going to number 4 next?
Yes.
Very well. Number 4, report on the current fiscal year budget.
And Tara's going to come up and give you the
Through
presentation.
the chair, before she starts, may I ask one question of our executive?
Absolutely.
Thank you. As funny as this sounds, the water district's not approving, not issuing the permits since it's deferring our expenses.
I'm sorry, what?
Water Board.
The water board
Yes,
not approving our permitting
Yes.
in order to do the mitigation and such
yes,
is actually deferring our expenditure of funds.
correct.
Okay, and are any animals being hurt in the interim? Is there any
No.
reason this isn't a good thing
Oh, our project, or their,
of not getting the permits?
oh, it's just so the importance of the project is for advanced mitigation, for the implementation of the regional general permit, so for 404 permitting. So it's important, so we have no restoration project that's done any riparian restoration, so any project proponent in need of riparian mitigation credits through the
Not available.
Corps, it's not available.
Okay.
And the regional board has agreed to do advanced mitigation credits also. They're a lot stricter in how they define that, as we're finding out, so it'll be harder for our project proponents to access them, but they will be available. So it's important for the streamlined permitting, and it's important for, let's say the county was doing a bridge project, then they could say, well, it's been mitigated at San Felipe.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah,
Help me
sure.
understand that.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Please proceed. Thank you.
All right, it's time for the numbers and some pictures. Now's your time to escape if you want to leave. Okay, so I'm going to go over the fiscal year 16-17 annual report. You're probably thinking this seems like a long time ago, but we report about 6 months after the year closes is our requirement. So, or actually 8 months after the year closes when we were required to do our reporting. So this is reporting on the 4th year of 50 of the Habitat Plan implementation, and is our 3rd annual report. All right, so in this reporting period, we covered 54 projects. We acquired 55 acres of new land. We confirmed the presence of 13 of 18 of our covered species in the reserve system or on future reserves. We initiated or completed 5 restoration projects across 4 watersheds. We continue to implement the pilot plant creation project for Cardiac Ceanothus. We have 201 acres of burrowing owl breeding habitat under a new management agreement. We did our stay-ahead compliance assessment. We or our partners received nearly $1 million in grants. We received $4.6 million in funding, and we had $3.1 million in expenditures. And so I'm going to go over these, not in great detail, but I guess give them more in the next slides. So our covered projects. We covered 54 projects during the permit term. For our private projects, 8 occurred in the city of San Jose, 5 in Morgan Hill, 8 in Gilroy, and 10 in the county of Santa Clara. For public projects, there was 1 in Gilroy, 1 for the city of Morgan Hill, 3 for the city of San Jose, 2 for county fleets and facilities, 1 for county communications, 8 for county parks, 3 participating special entities, and then 9 Santa Clara Valley Water District projects. So now that we're in our 4th year of implementation, we can start seeing trends over time. So you can see here, in years 1 and 2, we permitted 54 projects. Those had about 500 acres of permanent impacts and 41 acres of temporary impacts. In year 3, 57 projects, 600 acres of permanent impacts, about 100 acres of temporary. And in year 4, again, 54 projects. But you can see in year 4, our impacts are about half of the previous year. And that will feed into, you'll see later, about the funding received during this period. Looking at the cumulative impacts, most of our impacts are occurring in agriculture and developed lands, about 80% of the impacts. Again, this affects the fees collected. So projects impacting developed lands generally only pay the nitrogen deposition fee and not a land cover fee. And for temporary impacts, we're seeing a similar skew. So most of the impacts are happening in agricultural and developed areas. Reserves, this is the fun stuff. So here we see the Pacheco Creek Reserve. And we've done a few field trips out there recently, and when our other partners go out there, they're like, wow, this is what it's supposed to look like. So it's a small acreage, but it is a really impressive floodplain on the Pacheco Creek. So this property is about 55 acres. It was donated by Caltrans. And it has habitat for a number of our covered species. The California tiger salamander, California red-legged frog, foothill-legged frog, and western pond turtle. For birds, western burrowing owl wintering habitat, tricolor blackbird, and leaf-spells vireo. There's habitat for the fragrant fritillary, and it is in the area. If the fox is going to be anywhere, it'll be in this preserve area. And luckily, we're initiating a restoration project funded by the Local Assistance Grant Program to look at wildlife connectivity and permeability in this region. So this reserve itself has 2 culverted underpasses under 152, and we'll be setting up camera tracks there to see what is moving through the area. So we're likely to see pumas and badger, coyotes, and if there's kit fox, we'll see them as well. Another research project that we'll be implementing is a sycamore alluvial woodland genetic project. So looking at what is the effective distance between native and non-native sycamores to have them interact with each other and hybridize. We've already implemented 2 other projects on this site while it was under Caltrans ownership, and then during the transition to look at the California sycamore alluvial woodlands. It also has a run for steelhead. This is exciting because it opens up restoration opportunities for us on the site that not only look at our covered species, but also the potential to improve habitat for steelhead. Already, we've been working with the Point Blue Straw program to do restoration on the site, and our neighbors have been grazing the site for us a little bit. Okay. So that's Pacheco Creek. So where are our covered species? So we've done surveys at Coyote Ridge and at the Clara County Park in the conservation easement area, and also at our 2 management agreement areas at Don Edwards and Regional Wastewater Facility. So at Coyote Ridge and the Calero CE area, we had the bay checker spot butterfly, California tiger salamander, and western burrowing owl. And at Don Edwards and the Regional Wastewater Facility, we have the breeding owls. The Regional Wastewater Facility has the largest population in the South Bay. The California red-legged frog is found at Coyote Ridge, and both the foothill-legged frog and western pond turtle are found in the Calero Conservation Easement area. As for the plants, we looked at both Coyote Ridge and the Calero Conservation Easement area. Santa Clara Valley Dudleya, most beautiful jewel flower, Loma Prieta Hoyta, Mount Hamilton thistle, and smooth lystingia are found at both sites. Fragrant fritillary is found at Coyote Ridge, and we recently found the 3rd occurrence that we hadn't found during our first surveys. So we have 3 occurrences of fragrant fritillary at Coyote Ridge. Rough Calf Canyon jewel flower is also found on Coyote Ridge. All right, next. This is a speed round. So restoration. So we have 5 restoration projects across 4 watersheds. In the Guadalupe watershed, we have the Calero County Park Wetland and Pond Restoration Project. In the Coyote watershed, we have the San Felipe Creek Restoration Project at Grant County Park, as well as the Coyote Ridge Ponds Restoration Project. In the Pajaro watershed, we have the Pajaro, formerly known as Gonzalez Farm, now Pajaro Ranch Restoration Project. And then in Pacheco Creek, we have our restoration project at the Pacheco Creek Reserve. And finally, we have the Coyote Ridge, Santa Clara Valley Water District is implementing the Coyote Cenothis Creation Project. So where are we with each of these projects? So the Clara County Park project and Pajaro Ranch projects are complete. They are completed in 2016 and 2017. For both those projects, we've moved into the monitoring and management phase. For the Coyote Cenothos Creation Project, they're in test phase 3, which was initiated in 2016, which is now a combination of direct seeding and planting of Coyote Cenothos. Both the Pacheco Creek Reserve, the Pacheco Creek Reserve Riparian Restoration Project was initiated in 2017, and we're continuing to implement that project this year. And both the San Felipe Creek Restoration Project and the Stock Pond Habitat Restoration Project are slated for construction this summer. All right, the most exciting metrics of the Habitat Plan are the stay-ahead metrics. This means, this metric measures the rate at which conservation is accrued compared to the rate against the impacts incurred. And so we always want to be ahead with our conservation, and we are allowed a 10% deviation. So if we're hitting 90% on this graph, we're still okay. So good news is, for all the land cover types that we've impacted, we are ahead. And our aheadness ranges from 104% to over 100% for streams. I guess they're all over 100%. For conifer woodlands, we've had no impacts and no conservation. So for grasslands, we're about 100 acres ahead. For chaparral coastal scrub, we're about 5 acres. Oak woodlands, 4 acres. Riparian forest and scrub, 5.4 acres. Wetlands, almost 1 acre. Ponds, about 1/2 an acre. Streams, 13 miles. And for western boring owl, about 700 acres.
Excuse me, through the chair, if I may.
Yeah.
On your graph, conifer woodland, I assume that's a pine tree of sorts?
Yeah, anything that's like pine trees.
Okay.
Yes. So it'd be redwoods, conifer pine forest, most stuff that's in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so until we see an acquisition on that side of the valley, we're likely not going to preserve any.
And third column from the right where it says ponds, and it shows we're at 401%, but only 1/2 an acre ahead. That means our requirement's very small?
Yes.
Okay. And then that is streams. We're 13 miles of streams ahead?
Yes.
And 3 times more than what we need.
Yes.
So when you have something like that, we're trailing in only one item.
That's good.
Do we all those are great.
Yeah.
So do we try and identify areas that have conifer woodlands and contact the property owners? What do we do proactively to get a green bar there?
That's a good question. I think of it in terms of not many of our projects will be affecting conifer woodlands. We're not going to see a lot of that. But we are actively working with landowners in the Santa Cruz Mountain region to acquire lands.
Okay, so
there are proactive measures.
But you have some sort of map that would show where the conifers are located in the area.
Yeah, it's one of the metrics we look at when we're evaluating a property, is what natural land cover types are.
And I was asking simply about being proactive.
Yes.
You know, you need a left fielder to go look for.
Yes.
It's that kind of a thing.
Yes, and I'll talk about that in the EO report a little bit, about how we're trying to be proactive. So as
That's a great report.
As you all know, we put in a full price offer. It wasn't us that did it, was Post for Sargent Ranch, and it would have checked that box for conifer woodland. And we also had some kicking the tires discussions with other landowners in that same area, where they do have the mixed hardwood, redwood stands.
Great,
There's also
thank you.
some ponderosa pines, believe it or not, in the eastern part of the county, but I doubt we'll be affecting any of those areas.
Thank you.
Good question. I'm glad that they're clear enough for questions. That's good. So plants is a little bit different. So we track plants in terms of because we're in HCP and CCP, we have to not only protect to mitigate, but to protect to recover. So our stay ahead actually is looking at that protection to recover as well. And so we range from 25% compliance to over nearly 2,000% compliance. And I'll walk through this with you. So for Tiburon paintbrush and Tiburon paintbrush, we're not allowed to impact that species, so we don't track stay ahead. I left it on here because we are required to protect it. For Cardi ceanothus, we don't start tracking it till next year. And so right now we have about 500 plants that have been impacted, and that population creation project or an acquisition will go to offset those impacts. For Mount Hamilton thistle, fragrant fritillary, Loma pretahoita, and Metcalf Canyon jewelflower, we've protected very large occurrences of these species and have had no impacts. We've had impacts, though, to Santa Clara Valley Dudleya, but on the flip side, we have actually presented the number of occurrences, protected the number of occurrences that we are required to protect for the permit term for that species. For smooth Lysyngia, we're 3 behind. But the occurrence that we impacted was only 6 plants large, and we protected about 27.5 million plants. And we're learning more about this species. It's quite prolific. Its distribution shifts year to year. Its abundance shifts year to year. And so we're working with the wildlife agencies on this species, as well as most beautiful jewel flower, to talk about, how can we get credit for these millions of plants that we're protecting versus these small occurrences that we're impacting. Most beautiful jewel flower is a similar story, a single occurrence of 110 plants, but 3.1 million plants protected. And we're learning more, because we're doing research and monitoring of the species, and we're doing monitoring over large landscapes, we're learning more about what we don't know yet about the species. And so there is flexibility through the adaptive management process to move into stay-ahead compliance with these species.
Can I just ask, you said the discussions continue, and I was interested last year when this kind of came up, and do we think we're making progress with them, or?
Well, now we know more. So we have our baseline, we have our preliminary baseline on Cardi Ridge. And for example, for the most beautiful, for the jewel flowers, we still have to do another round of surveys. But everyone is wanting to get to yes. They don't see a problem, at least in our TAC meetings, that we're running into this problem. So that's helpful.
Great.
Can I
And
ask
just
a
to-
clarifying question?
Yes.
Sorry. In the first summary slides, we mentioned, we have a bullet that says 13 of the 18 covered species have been found present in the reserves. So which are those 5 species that are currently in our plan?
They're not protected. So it's the
Are not found in the actual ground truthing?
San Joaquin kit fox,
That will be more in,
tricolor blackbird,
yes,
these spells vireo,
yeah.
Tiburon paintbrush,
Mhm.
and Cardi ceanothus.
Right.
I have to write them down too, to remember.
And 2 of those haven't been seen in the plan area in a number of years.
Right, and because I'm so curious about the tricolored blackbird, have gone on early morning surveys in spring along with biologists. They're very difficult to see, but is it possible that we can hear them, and is that considered an occurrence?
So there's a slide I didn't present to you guys, I presented to the pack, that actually goes through these 5 species. And so for tricolor blackbird, we've been working with Talon and Ecological to identify where the colonies are located in the county.
Okay.
And right now, we're finding them at Calero, Chesbrough Reservoir, on Cañada de los Osos, in San Antonio Valley, and then in foraging in Coyote Valley. So we know where the birds are. It's about having them in the reserve system. What we're finding is that it's likely that they're coming to the valley for a second breeding event, not as a primary breeding event, and they're using our area for foraging. So that's where the birds are right now. They're just not in our reserve properties.
Correct.
It's possible. I would say that Coyote Ridge isn't a good place necessarily to do restoration for the species. They're typically not found at that elevation. But Pacheco Creek, there's some ponds there and on neighboring properties that could be enhanced to have better habitat for that species. in Coyote Valley, there might be opportunities to partner with Open Space Authority, for example, or others to do restoration for the species. And then also opportunities working with the water district with that species.
The species, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Rob, to your question, we're trying to come up with a way to recognize abundance. And so we're looking at the CNDDB occurrences, which means so when you find a new occurrence, you're supposed to contact the state, and it goes into a database. So when this, so before, like Tara said, we're learning a lot more now on what's going on. But when there was biologists up there and they identified the occurrences, they assigned a plant population number. So did they see 10 plants? Did they see 27 million plants? So we're hoping we can extrapolate if each of those so each of those data points, let's assume they saw 900,000 plants. Then we can extrapolate, well, if these two occurrences, they identified 900,000 plants, and we have 27 million plants, how do we do a weighted average on, how do we equate the 27 versus what was originally recorded, which is what all our occurrences are based on, the assumptions of the plan, which were based on the CNDB data points. So it's sort of taking what was and what is, and like Tara said, we are trying to get to a yes, where if the data underestimated the population because they were restricted to only certain parts of the property, that's how we're trying to get around to saying, okay, 27 million is worth more than one occurrence, or worth more than the original two occurrences that were identified up there, because there's a lot more plants up there. And part of it is we have a very black and white rule. If you find a clump of plants and then a quarter mile you find another clump and then you find another clump, that's considered one occurrence. And is that fair to kind of look at it that way? So those are the things we're trying to work through. And once Clara gets enrolled in the reserve system, that takes care of some of that imbalance also, because all of a sudden we're now protecting plant occurrences at Clara. And that helps with the accounting also.
I have a different question.
Yeah, it's the limitations of the methodology and the data on how we code it, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that's why we got the 99 plant occurrences for the Dudleya, because that's what the plan assumed was up there. But the assumption of the plan for smooth Lysingea didn't think about abundance. 6 plants versus 27 million plants. So that's one of the things we're trying to work through. So some of the assumptions that were made are kind of creating some challenges for us.
Turned it off. Okay. What about in the reverse, especially with fires and such? At any point do you go and say, oh, we used to have 27 million and fire hit these acreage? And do you only do the land we own in here, or do you cover lands that we don't own but it's on the map for the agency? For example, I know there was a small fire in Gilroy, in the hills in Gilroy. I don't know if those particular hills are in, I'd have to go and research it and see, but does anybody ever go after a fire and then say, oh, this much is now deducted from, we need a plan for that?
No, it's an interesting question, because some of the fires in Southern California, there were some species that went extinct because of the fires, and there were some that they thought went extinct that now are back. So we have a 50-year permit, so I don't know how these plants evolved with fire, so I don't know. It would probably be the intensity of the fire would determine whether they would recover or not. Fire is a management tool you can use with some of these plants. I know there was a fire near Anderson Dam that affected the Coyote ceanothus population, and it did recover, and it's doing well. But that's a great question. On private land that we were hoping to acquire in the future because of the plant occurrence, if all of a sudden it blanks out, whether because of fire or climate change or whatever, yeah, it makes our job harder if it never comes back within that 50-year permit term. Yeah.
Thanks. Please continue.
Yeah, we can keep talking about this. All right, so funding. So Ed went over a lot of the funding stuff just now, and so again, we're in our 4th year, so we can see some trends. So here you have non-fee funding versus fee funding. In years 1 and 2, we had a total of 17 and this is both funding that the Habitat Agency received or our partners received to implement the Habitat Plan. So not all of this actually went into was taken into the Habitat Agency. So 17.8 million in years 1 and 2, 8.3 in year 3. For year 4, 4.6 million. As Ed just presented, we're looking at about $10 million in fees for our 5th year. And so we've received about $30.6 million in fee and non-fee funding for Habitat Plan implementation. So if we look year over year, in years 1 and 2, it was about equal fee and non-fee funding. In years 3, we received more fee funding than non-fee funding, 4.8 compared to 3.5. And then in year 4, 3.1 in fee funding and 1.5 in non-fee funding. And so that's a total of $16.7 million in fee funding. So that's money that comes directly to the Habitat Agency. And then $13.9 million in funding, a portion of which goes to our partners. And this is right along with what the Habitat Plan assumed. So the Habitat Plan assumes 55% of fee funding and about 45% non-fee funding. So expenditures, again, Ed just went over this, so I'll be quick. We, in year 1, years 1 and 2, that's when we bought OSA bought Coyote Ridge, and that's reflected here as land acquisition by partners. So that $10.7 million in years 1 and 2. In year 3, $2.2 million. And in year 4, $3.2 million. So a total of $16 million in expenditures. So about we're burning about half our money at this point. So we have half in reserves. And you can see here, the Habitat Agency total expenditures over years 1 through 4 is $7.2 million. Land acquisition by our partners, which at this point, this is the OSA acquisition of Coyote Ridge, is $8.6 million, and then grants received and expended by our partners is about $234,000. So are we on track? So we're in reporting year 4, permit year 4, about 8% through our permit term. And so if we look at impacts versus conservation versus existing open space enrollment, fee funding, non-fee funding, expenditures, we can kind of, on a bigger scale, look at where the Habitat Plan implementation is at. So for permanent impacts, we've impacted about 1,300 acres of land of a total of about 18,000 acres that we're going to impact. We're right on track for permit term. Temporary impacts are burning a little hot, but not that off of 8%, so 9%, 200 acres of temporary impacts versus 2,200 acres of anticipated. For conservation, we've conserved about 1,800 acres of about 3,500 acres of new lands. Each acquisition is rather large. I mean, Pacheco was small, but our next one is likely to be another 1,000 acres, 2,000, maybe 3,000 acres. So conservation jumps by a lot each time. So seeing 5% here isn't that big of a deal because the next time we're going to see it at 10%, 12%. Existing open space enrollment, we foresee Calero County Park to be enrolled this next year, and so we're going to see that jump to about 2,000 acres. So that's going to be increasing in the near future. For fee funding, I mentioned earlier, a lot of our impacts have been to non-fee paying land cover types, And so that's why you see that gap between the impacts and the fee funding. In addition, county impacts are offset by enrollments, so you're not seeing fees from those projects. So fee funding is about 16 million of 364 million, and then non-fee funding is about 15 million to 294 million. Again, non-fee funding looks a little bit low, and part of that is that federal monies have slowed in terms of being available for grants. And then also, some of the state programs have shifted their cycle. And our expenditures are lower than anticipated, so about 16 million of it anticipated, 564 million over the permit term. So this is just kind of a snapshot in time. We're only in our 4th year, so it's kind of early to say, are we truly on track? We have 50 years. So looking at this, we are generally on track. So I want to say thank you to all of you, all of our co-permittees, all of our consultants, and all of our local partners that help with implementation of the Habitat Plan. There's a lot of folks involved in the implementation of the Habitat Plan, not just the staff, and so it takes a village. So, any questions?
Yes.
Question for you. Sometimes with endangered species like animals, they try and protect what's there. And in other places, like with the panda, they try and artificial insemination, they try and breed and create. Back to the pine cone one, the pine trees really intrigues me. I understand when we try to acquire land that has endangered species like that particular conifer, could we not purchase conifers and put them on land that we have jurisdiction over and preservation responsibility of, and be farming endangered species? Not only increasing the population period, but also for relocation purposes elsewhere. Wouldn't that be another way?
With the conifers, it's just a habitat type that we have metrics that we're supposed to protect so many acres. So the good news is none of the conifers are endangered. But species that use the conifers are let's see, which ones do we have? Well, some of the amphibians will use the conifer forest that we're covering. But yes to your other question. So we're talking about setting up a captive rearing program for the burrowing owls, because the burrowing owls are not doing well locally. They could become extirpated from the plant area. So Humane Society of San Mateo, we're talking about taking a trip up to British Columbia to see what they're doing in Alberta. The Canadian version of the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing a lot of neat stuff with the burrowing owls, and we want to learn how they're doing and try to recover. There has been activities by butterfly biologists to relocate the bay checker spot both to Tulare Hill, San Bruno Mountain, and Edgewood Park. So Tara referred to the Coyote Ceanothus restoration project. We also do habitat creation to create more habitat, to kind of increase resiliency, more replication of the similar type habitat on the landscape. And the target there is the amphibians. The connectivity stuff that we're working on, it's to try to make sure that these disparate populations can connect to each other and ensure that there's the genetic mixing, so you don't have inbreeding with some of the species. So those are with the conifers itself. It's just the plan had a bunch of metrics: protect so many acres of grassland, so many acres of oak woodland, and
so Ed, if I understand you correctly, the conifer woodlands are just another habitat where endangered species reside. So if we created a pine grove,
yes,
could we not relocate some of these endangered species from these other areas to that pine grove?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
and creating a pine grove may be something we need to do in the future, given climate change.
Okay.
And we can restore oak woodlands and that kind of stuff too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just figured there'd be a place where the pine trees would flourish, either higher, lower altitude, whatever, and whatever endangered species use that for their habitat, it seems we could say this would be a great place if there was a grove there for the burrowing owl or for the butterfly or for the whatever.
Yes,
And we could create that, like people breed, I mean, salmon.
yes,
Just, okay.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I would like to reconcile, because you know how it is when we measure things. It's what we measure and how it looks makes a difference. So if I understand correctly, the plan has in acreage targets to stay ahead. And we are doing very good in year 4, reporting year 4, for all the different type of habitats, and mostly for all the plant species except 2. But then why are we not on track when it comes to the other metrics that we have on the different slide? I have page 8 slide, which is permanent impacts, temporary impacts. For most times, except for temporary impacts, we are doing lower than 8%. Can we reconcile these two different data points?
So we have probably like 1,000 metrics with
I
the
know.
habitat plan. And so the stay ahead only looks, we have to do stay ahead compliance for natural communities and for burrowing owl and for the plant occurrences. And it's kind of like one simplified metric that has a lot of information in it. As far as the graph with the are we on track, that actually isn't a compliance graphic. It's just more of an information to say, like, to be able to compare a bunch of different metrics in one graph. And so as far as compliance, it's not an issue. As far as, should everything be equal? Maybe, but we don't know yet. We're only in year 4. So I think as we progress towards in the permit term, we are going to see things moving up.
Especially when it comes to buying conservation lands.
Correct.
It's a big chunk and it will jump up. So did we set up this bar to reach 8%?
Like, I put it on the
On
slide.
the slide, okay. It's not enumerated in the plan, I think.
No,
Okay.
it's just for.
Thank you.
It's just.
Because I was wondering what part of the plan I missed because I didn't see
No,
it.
it's just a
Thank you for
graphic.
that, yes. Okay.
I can move it lower or higher. We can do a live edit.
You have the power to move it up and down.
Motion to accept.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye. Yes.
Thank you, great job on the report.
I know.
Not very nice presentation.
Yeah.
It's always very educational, tells the story well.
Thank you. I'll leave this up just so you guys have something nice to look at.
That is
So I
a
think
nice
that moves
picture.
us to number 7, your report.
My report, the reason why you come every day, right? Come to every meeting. So I just wanted to give you an update on both the state advocacy trip and the federal advocacy trip, which were both in April. So we were working in collaboration with the California Habitat Conservation Coalition and a lobbyist of sort called EEC to set up meetings with, in my case, it was meeting with the delegation, the state delegation that represents us. I only met with Senators Bell and Murkowski, and I met with the staff, with the assembly members and Senator Monning's staff. So these are the items that we discussed with them. It was funding for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I thanked them for their support in spearheading what is now called Prop 68, the Park and Water Bond that'll be on the ballot in June. That has money earmarked in it for NCCPs, $52 million. It also has monies for Wildlife Conservation Board, which we can compete with other entities to get. And it has a lot of other things in there that we aren't competitive on, but are good for parks and urban greening and a lot of that stuff. So it helps that Assembly Member Garcia represents the Coachella Valley, and Coachella Valley has NHCP, NCCP. So it's nice to have the right people in the right places. And Senator Bell, when I met with him, it was by accident. The meeting with Wachowski was arranged, but I was meeting with Bell's staff, and he took me aside and said, "Why don't you come into my office?" He was walking in, and I spent about a half hour more listening than talking. And but he did lay out some of his priorities, and he as you probably all know, he knows this county like the back of his hand. So he talked about Highway 17 and connectivity in the Lexington Reservoir area and making sure you have good connectivity to the county parks in that area. He identified each county park. He's concerned about urban park issues in San Jose. He talked about connectivity in Coyote Valley. And he had a lot of interest in Pacheco Pass, which is outside his jurisdiction, but he talked about potentially another state park in that area along 152. Which, if we can work with state parks to acquire land, then that really helps us in achieving some of our conservation objectives, because that's an important area for conservation. Given it's under less threat of development, the land's a little cheaper, there's some very large tracts of property in that area. We also talked about the continued overall support for NCCPs and HCPs. And one of the next steps that we're going to do is arrange field trips for legislators in the plan area when they're home, to take them around, try to build legislative champions. I can tell you that all the HCPs, they all met with their own delegations, but we all picked up the phone and said, we really need your support for NCCPs and the park bond. We really need you guys to support. And they stepped up and delivered on everything we asked. So just to let you know about that. The federal trip was different. Yes?
Excuse me if I may, through the chair. Question to the attorney, if I may. My understanding, there's no other action items left on our agenda. So if
Correct.
anybody needs to leave,
So
we don't
people
have a
need to
quorum.
leave. That's why we did what we did.
Yeah.
Yes. So with the federal trip, it's a different story. I was there with representatives of the National HCP Coalition, and there were representatives from Texas, Defenders of Wildlife, and in the past we had, last year when I wasn't in Washington, there were folks from Florida that also attended. One of the takeaways that came out of that meeting, so the Texas people did meet with Senator Cruz, and there was, they did tell him this is important, and he listened, and he asked some good questions from what they told us. My focus was our delegation, so I met with Congressman Panetta, and I met with Congresswoman Lofgren, and one of the real surprising things that was a takeaway for me is when both Panetta, because of our Section 6 conundrum, which I'll talk about in a minute, so we asked them, well, could you write a letter and they or do something, pick up the phone and call Secretary Zinke, and what Lofgren told me was, they ignore our letters, they ignore our phone calls. And Panetta said exactly the same thing. Lofgren, being the veteran who's been in Congress for a while, she says, Panetta being new, he didn't, but given who his dad is, he probably knows the way it used to be. But Lofgren said, this never has happened before. Cabinet secretaries were always responsive when a member of Congress would contact them. So it's a new world order in Washington, for better or worse. In my opinion, it doesn't sound like better. So, and I didn't get into ask them if this is how it is with housing, with HUD, or with Department of Commerce. I just was focused on Department of Interior, because that's who we work with. So I talked about a bipartisan letter, and they said that might gain some traction. We met with Fish and Wildlife staff, including political appointees. We met with Department of Interior staff. And the Department of Interior staff, the political appointees were, they listened, but they were not, it's a different tone. Both the political appointees and the career staff of Fish and Wildlife Service were obviously frustrated with what's happening in the Department of Interior and what's happening with their grant programs. So right now, every grant, 50,000 or greater, is going under scrutiny, being reviewed by one man, and this individual is an appraiser from Montana. He's known Zinke since kindergarten, but he's been assigned to $5 billion worth of grants. It's a Herculean task. I don't know how one single person could get through. So our $2 million grant, along with the grant for West Riverside County, which Congressman Calvert, a Republican, oversees that, and East Contra Costa. So those are three areas that we're going to be awarded grants. So one thing we realize is that we need to get more senators, both senators who are Democrats and Republicans, to be advocating for this. Not just Harris and Feinstein. But Prime Policy Group is going to contact Senator Feinstein to see if she will call Senator Murkowski, who's a friend. And Murkowski is the Appropriations Committee Chair for Interior. So hoping that her personal friendship with Murkowski will result in Murkowski being willing to pick up the phone and call Zinke and say, what's up? We met with staff from the majority and the minority for 4 or 5 committees that oversee Interior or Environment and Public Works. And to a person, they could not understand why Interior was doing what they're doing. They had no complaints with the Section 6 program or the HCP program. It seems to be something that Secretary Zinke is concerned about, grants and land acquisition programs and federal ownership of land, which is not the case here. This would be local. But there is bipartisan support in Congress. The money was appropriated by a Republican Congress. There was bipartisan support. So the money that was appropriated in 16-17 budget, the money and was solicited in 17 and was awarded in 17 is being held up. And the money that was supposed to be solicited this year and was appropriated last year hasn't even been announced for applying for it. So we're trying everything we can through the help of the county's advocate, the Prime Policy Group, through the national and the California coalitions to try to get this money freed up for we can spend it here in our county. I'll give you a grant update. I talked about Section 6, so no need to belabor that. But we did apply for 2 grants totaling $945,000. One, a Prop 1 grant through the Coastal Conservancy, and one through the water districts. I get their Ds all mixed up, the D5, the D7, but D2, but one of their Ds, we applied for money, and it would be used for creek restoration in the Pacheco Creek property. So it'd be more intensive work than the school kids planting trees. And if we get those grant awards, we will proceed with a San Felipe Creek-like restoration project. On the acquisition front, I don't want to give you a list. I'm hopeful that Clara will be enrolled in the reserve system this year. It's an important piece of the puzzle. It'll help with straightening out some of those numbers that you saw in that one chart, that bar graph that Tara showed you. It's a beautiful property. It has the plant occurrences. It has yellow-legged frog. We already did a restoration project there that has a lot of CTS in it. So I'm hoping that'll happen this year or early next year. But I just wanted to bring to your attention, we sent out this flyer to nearly 400 landowners in the county. And the criteria was properties that were identified as a high priority acquisition, properties that were over 100 acres, and properties that were in the reserve system or were important smaller holdings on the edge of already protected properties. And to date, we've had about 40 landowners express interest. Some weren't a good fit, but we're in negotiations with some of them now. And we put a couple offers in already. One was rejected, and another one is being considered. And so hopefully out of this will come some land being acquired too, and maybe even some conifer woodlands too. And that's all I have to report.
Any questions?
Nope.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Interesting report.
I just have
good
one
job.
comment. 3 more years, huh?
Oh, what's that?
I said federal level, 3 more years, right?
Three more. I'm counting the days. What do you mean?
Any final anything before we close?
Nope.
Then we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
and
already know I
Valerie.
will not be here on June 21st.
Oh, yeah?
We take the, no, this is work.
Adios?